All right, so I wanted to sit down and talk a little bit about the frame rate thing that's been going on that a few people have noticed I've been doing with the channel recently over the last couple of videos. So like a few people noticed, maybe more people noticed, but a few people commented on the Kappa video that came out last week that I kind of rushed out last week. Um, that that video is 48p, and that I was doing something kind of maybe a little unusual with the World of Warcraft video. And so what's going on there is for about a year now I've been working on and off on a video about high frame rate. And I guess more than just about being high frame rate, more than just being about high frame rate, it ends up being about the history of frame rate in motion picture, kind of as a whole, which you may notice is a very big topic. And this is part of the problem, is that it is a video that has very much gotten away from me. The script is not done and is very long, very long, and kind of still growing. And so I was hoping to have that out for uh, the end of October. That didn't happen. Now definitely not happening for November. Like November, I was supposed to already be moving on to the aesthetic of film, which I want to shoot a portion of on film. I have a bunch of film up in the freezer that I want to a bunch of black and white that I want to pull out, shoot that on. Shoot portions of that on film. Actually, send the film out to Niagara Labs out in Ontario, and then get the scans of that back and the negatives. I want my negatives back, but get the scans, and then cut that and edit that together with a bunch of with video footage. And yeah, so I wanted to have that done in November, and that's not happening. That one I'm actually going to push, just because I don't know, for some reason I like really don't want to do the film video in the winter. I don't know why. Just on like some emotional level, I really don't want to do it in the winter. Well, it's cold out, even though I won't be going outside for any of it that I can think of. But anyway, the high frame rate one has gotten away from me a little bit, in part because it started off that I was just going to like, it's like, oh, I was basically going to do what Captain Disillusion did with his. Maybe a little bit longer. Well, not just maybe a little bit longer, a little bit longer, a little more in depth on like how some of the visual artifacts come to exist. Talk about like interpolation and and the whole thing would be this mix of like, you're actually demonstrating by mixing frame rates while doing it. And then as I was doing it, I started to encounter more and more things that led me down deeper and deeper research rabbit holes. In particular, I started to feel like it would be, on one hand, I felt like it would be remiss to not talk about Douglas Trumbull's work. So to talk about ShowScan. ShowScan was this format that Douglas Trumbull developed back in the late 70s, early 80s, that shot at 60 frames per second on a large format camera, 70 millimeter film camera. And it didn't really go anywhere. Douglas Trumbull is, if you don't know, he's the guy who did like the special effects work for 2001. He was the guy who was like brought in to finish the effects work on Star Trek: The Motion Picture. He made Brain Scan. He made the Ride movie for Back to the Future: The Ride. So he's done a lot of stuff, and you've probably seen his work. Oh, he did the effects work for Close Encounters of the Third Kind. So a lot of spaceships, and he kind of got tired of being pigeonholed into being the spaceship guy. But anyway, so he developed ShowScan, this 60 FPS large format, medium format uh, format in the late 70s, and he tried to promote it throughout the 80s, and it didn't really go anywhere. And I get into a lot of the reasons for that, but the thing that really caught me about it were these claims about like the scientific tests that he's done. And it really it led me down a rabbit hole of research into like claims verification. And a lot of the script is spent separating and marking the boundary between uh, sort of promotional rhetoric and fact, particularly the places where the two are in a hazy relationship with one another. There's a lot of situations in motion picture technology, like when you're talking about resolution, when you're talking about frame rate, when you're talking about bit depth, where there is a technical reality. And I don't mean technical in the sense of like, well, on a technicality. I mean like, technological. There is a technological reality of how the things behave that underpins a lot of these then promotional claims. And they're not lies, but they're not necessarily accurate either. And I wound up going through a lot of work to unravel that. And a huge amount of time actually was spent just trying to like verify some of the claims in the first place, because I found these things. So like I'm reading Wikipedia just as like the starting point, that it's like, okay, like Wikipedia is pretty good for like names and dates. and and I was just confirming something, and I noticed there was this claim that it's like, yeah, they ran like biometrics tests to prove that 60 FPS was the best. And I was like, but there was no citation on it. And I'm like, well, that's weird. So I go deeper. I go looking for verification of that claim, like just like where is that claim from? And mostly I just found places like repeating it, all of which were more recent. They were usually like last 2 years, pretty much. And so it's clear that whoever was writing like those articles was pretty much just taking it straight off of Wikipedia as gospel. And so I did a lot of digging, and I went through several decades of Sight and Sound magazine, which is the furnace turning on. I went through several decades of Sight and Sound magazine, which is the British Film Institute's magazine, trade magazine, and I did eventually find sort of the claim and a little bit more detail on it. It gets a bit more nuanced, but it's also interesting because he makes some other claims in that are themselves kind of like questionable, and it did reveal something of like the methodology, and the methodology revealed some like kind of flaws about the assumptions that were being made and about the way that people are interacting with it. And so I've been doing my own kind of tests with high frame rate, just to kind of put my money where my mouth is and to make sure that I'm not like going completely out into the cornfield with a bunch of the things that I'm saying. And so one of the things that I did, so with the World of Warcraft video, I was mixing frame rates. So like I recorded the vast majority of the gameplay footage was recorded at 60 FPS, because that's sort of That's kind of the target number that video games have arrived at for a bunch of reasons. And the stuff that I was here in the space I shot at 48. But now that actually wound up being illuminating in how in the technical aspects of it. So you're probably wondering, like, how are you shooting at 48 in the first place? Now 60 FPS, shooting at 60 FPS is not hard. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 cameras in this room right now that can shoot 60 FPS at least one resolution, like at least 720p. That's the furnace. So 60 FPS is easy, and this is one of the things that the video is actually going to get into, is that 60 FPS video is actually surprisingly easy to shoot either on purpose or by accident, because a very, very wide range of cameras support 60 FPS capture, because 720/60 is a broadcast TV standard, and 1080/60i is also a broadcast TV standard, and so 1080/60p was not really that much of a stretch, and because like Sony and Sony was actually the big player, because Sony was, is involved with the standards creations, and they make the PlayStation, and so they had an interest in making sure that like 1080/60p was going to end up in the transport specs for HDMI, and like video game console creators and whatnot are involved in all of this, and so you wound up with HDMI and basically like a bunch of the high definition digital video specs, and like the way that the data is moved from point A to point B could all support 60 FPS. And so cameras just kind of, if you can do 720, like if you can do 720 60p, you can do 1080/60p without much technological trouble. Basically, as long as the sensor can do 1080 and it can do 60p, it can do both of them. The actual limitation, so like this camera here, the XF100, this can't do 1080/60, but that's not because like the sensor is theoretically incapable of it. That's purely a matter of the data processing in it can't, like, this camera's old enough that like it's just not fast enough to handle that much data is the issue. Like that's the actual that's the limitation there. And so it's really like if your data throughput is high enough, then you can absolutely handle it fairly trivially, because the rest of your system is designed to do it. 48 is a little bit odd in that regard then. Like it's not widely supported. In fact, there's only like, it's not widely supported, and then there's a bunch of problems, a bunch of tricks. There's really only a couple cameras that will do 48 FPS as a native format, because there's two factors at play. One is the time base, and then the other is the actual frame rate, and these are playing, like these are intertwined with one another. So in a film camera, your frame rate is just your frame rate. Like you just run the motor faster is literally all there is to it. In video, like in digital video, I should be specific here because there's also analog video, which is we're not going to get into. In digital video, you have the time base of the file, and then you have the frame rate that it's actually recorded at. And these are important because this is going to determine how the video is then read on the other end. And if you have it's not just how the video is going to be read on the other end, it's also how it's like married to the audio that's being recorded at the same time, and it gets really it's a thing. So if you have a time base of 24 FPS and you record 48, then what the file that comes out the other end of that is half speed. It's slow motion. And that's kind of the intended kind of use of this stuff. And recording at 48 in the first place, like just getting 48 frames per second is tricky. So there's only a handful of cameras that support 48 FPS as a project frame rate, as a time base. And that's the Red 6K and above cameras, and the RE Alexa. Not even all of the Alexas, just like the Alexa, basically the newer Alexas. Anything from the Alexa Mini and newer can do 48 as a project frame rate. And then there's a question of like some of them support, like, so some of the Reds and some of the REs support what's called like 48, it's not drop frame, it's pull down. So if you've ever been looking through camera settings and you notice like you had like 23,976 and 24, 23,976 actually exists as this weird quirk of video being recorded in a cinematic way for television, specifically for television. So TV has been shot at 24 FPS. North American TV has been shot at 24 FPS for a long time, where they will shoot the content on film at 24 and then put it through this whole process to turn it into 30 frame interlaced video. Which is what's called it's called a 3-2 pull down, or a 2-3 pull down, or a 2-3-2-3 pull down, or a 3-2-2-3. But those are actually two different parts. Like it's not a 2-3 pull down, it's a 2-3 pull down. So the pull down is specifically an element where in order to change the timing of the audio track, in order to get everything to work properly, to fit nicely, the whole thing needs to be slowed down by 0.01% or 0.1%. Is it a I am completely spacing on the number, but it's a fraction of 1%. It's less than 1%. It needs to be slowed down by less than 1%, or the 0.1 or 0.01, and those are actually a huge difference. But forgive me, I'm doing this off the top of my head, and I'm not good with retaining numbers. So it needs to be just like ever so slightly slowed down in order to fit nicely. And so 23,976 exists as a frame rate because it's pulled down. So rather than needing to do so that in the conversion process to get it ready for broadcast television, you don't need to do a pull down. You just need to do the interlacing conversion. So you just need to do the 2-3 thing where you take each frame, you split it into upper and lower fields, and then you 2-3 pattern. It's this whole thing. It's just a pattern of how the fields are played out. And 48, so 48, you'll actually, on a few of these cameras, you'll find that they have 48 and they have 48 pull downs. So it's actually 47 point whatever. So, numbers. And that's available as a project frame rate. And all of this stuff. So 48 does exist within the DCI spec. Like, it was actually like fully detailed out as a future proofing spec. And so you'll find it in a select number of cameras. You'll find it as an option in Premiere Pro, in Resolve, in Final Cut, in Avid. But you won't find it in very many cameras, like only a few cameras. And so how I'm getting around that is I have the Blackmagic Pocket 4K, which does not have 48 FPS as a project frame rate. It's not an available time base, but it does have single frame increment off speed recording. So you set it to, you take the camera, you choose your time base, in this case starting with a time base of 24 for a variety of reasons that are convenient to me. Then set the camera to off speed 48 FPS. So this is intended to record slow motion. So I get the file out of the other end, it's running at half speed, but it does record the audio, but the audio isn't in sync. So you take that and then you just compress it. You just tell the computer to, like, hey, interpret this as 48 FPS. Problem there is that it's not sync sound. So if you take 48 frames per second and you just like half the speed of it, you just double the speed, it's now playing at 24 frames per second, but it's not playing at 24 frames per second to the precision necessary to maintain sound sync over long periods of time. So this was actually a thing that I was like back of my head aware of might have happened, and it absolutely did happen with the World of Warcraft video. So the basic recording for the World of Warcraft video, like the time that I'm sitting and like standing in front of the camera and reading the script and doing it a couple times and correcting mistakes and all of that, the runtime of that was, I think, 2 files, both like I cut in the middle, and 2 files that were both around like 40 minutes each. And so both of these are long enough that it gets to the point where, so you may say it like, you might be thinking, well, 48 frames per second is 48 frames per second. It's how, how can it be off? Well, it only needs to be off by 1/10 of a percent, 100th of a percent. And it'll cause problems. So I think I would need to double check my numbers, but I think it was off by 100th of a percent. So you were losing like 1 frame a minute, which is not really that big of a deal. If you think it's like, oh, like, so every single frame, so every second has 48 frames in it, but that 48th frame is like, a couple milliseconds. Like it's not an absolutely perfect division of 48 per second. It's just, it's 48. And that little bit of squidginess at the border compounds over a very long period of time, or over the course of minutes, like not just minutes, like tens of minutes. So if you record something off speed like that, so you record at 48 and you just double the speed, so it's playing, it will be in sync at the beginning, and it'll run in sync for a very long time. And if it's a short enough clip, like if it's a 5-minute clip, you're not even going to notice that it's out by the end. I feel like it was longer. Like, now that I think about it, I think it was losing a frame every like 3 minutes or something like that. Because it was long enough that by the time we were hitting, like, it would be in sync for a really long time, and then it just starts to like slowly drift. But if you go from the beginning of the file to the end of the file, like if you jump to the 40-minute mark, it's very obviously out of sync, but it's not super far out of sync. It's only out of sync by like, half a second or something like that, which is a lot in it. Like, it's very, very obviously sounds are not lining up with what's on screen, but it's when you're talking about like how many frames and how much like the drift per minute, it's very easy to record something. If something's only like 10 minutes long, you're not even going to have visible drift by the end of it. Like, it's going to be that slight. So it does need to be these really long recordings in order to notice. But so the way that I then have to work around it is that if I'm going to be recording for a very long period of time, I either then need to like manually squeeze that at the end and just like find it, or save myself some trouble and just do a tail slate. So like you do a head slate and a tail slate, and then you have 2 points in time that you can reference, and you know how far apart they are because they're a fixed period of like they're a fixed length of real time apart from one another. So as long as the file is unbroken, if you just take those 2 ends and squeeze them in so that they line up with their respective reference points on the audio track, they will absolutely, like, then everything in the middle will be in sync as well. And it's a lot of hoops to jump through. But then here's the thing. Here's the wild thing. This was actually the main thing that I was testing with the Kappa video was, does YouTube support arbitrary frame rates? Yes, no, sort of. They don't quite support any arbitrary frame rate you want to throw out, but they absolutely do support 48 FPS. Like, if you upload a 48 FPS native file to YouTube, it will show at the maximum quality, 1080p 48. And it'll play back at that. And that was interesting. And kind of the thing that I find funny in all of this HFR stuff, and this is where I'm getting really out of control with writing this video, is that there's this comedy in the way that Ang Lee and James Cameron and Peter Jackson are presenting high frame rate as this super futuristic thing. This inaccessible, it's the future of cinema that people are just not ready for yet. And yet, the people producing content for YouTube are better equipped to make and deliver high frame rate material than Hollywood necessarily is. Not necessarily 48. 48's a quirk. 60? Absolutely. Super easy for tons of people to produce 60. You go on YouTube and you watch a whole bunch of GoPro footage and it's 60 by default, because that's like, if you pull a GoPro out of the box and just shoot with it, it's set to 60 because it's a sport cam. And a lot of random webcams, or a lot of people, like, they end up producing their content for YouTube at 60 completely oblivious to it because all they did was just turn their camera settings up to the highest. So they took the camera out and they went through the settings menu and were just like, they just turned it all the way up. Didn't know what any of it meant. Didn't particularly care. They just knew, like, and this is not me criticizing these people. Like, you know, it is a very logical thing to do, that if you are not like a trained video technician, but you do know you want your YouTube videos to look good, you're just going to turn it up to the highest settings, because how can you go wrong with the highest settings? Like, it's going to look the best? Question mark. Ideally, like, you know, and so that's just what comes out. Like, a lot of people I've seen on YouTube are just producing stuff at 60 because they just turned their camera all the way up. They just went to the list of quality and picked the one at the top, which happens to be 1080p 60. And never thought twice about it. And YouTube is far more equipped to deliver that content in a greater degree of flexibility than most cinemas. And the thing that I find just darkly humorous about it is that they seem oblivious to that and unwilling to take advantage of it if they do know about it. Gemini Man doesn't have an HFR trailer out. Or maybe Gemini Man has one, but Billy Lynn didn't? No, I think it's the other way around. Billy Lynn had an HFR trailer available, which has since been taken down, and Gemini Man doesn't. And like all the BTS stuff is like, you've got Ang Lee talking about like the future of high frame rate and, you know, how it's going to change cinema. And the only problem with his movies, the only reason why people think it's weird, is because they're just not used to it yet. And then he's putting out trailers at 24p. And it's like, you know, YouTube can handle your 60p version of your movie. Like, if you're trying to sell people on this, then show it. Like, you can deliver it to people in their houses. And that's what made me realize, like, oh, it has nothing to do with the audience. They're not interested in the audience. They don't care about the audience. They're not actually even trying to persuade the audience. It does not matter to them, because their priorities have nothing to do with high frame rate in and of itself. And this is when I was going through all of the stuff, and I suddenly, like, the pattern like snapped into focus, and I realized, like, oh, their concern is 3D. They don't give a crap about 48 frames per second or 60 frames per second or 120 frames per second in and of itself. And this starts with The Hobbit, goes to Ang Lee, goes to Avatar, which are in theory shooting at 48 FPS or 60, who knows what it's at right now. That they purely see HFR as a means to fix the problems with 3D. And it was like, oh, okay, I get what's going on now. And so this is all part of what I'm like trying to like grapple with and bring into something a lot more coherent than just this rambling vlog. Like, it's a lot of information and it's all in my head, but I'm having trouble structuring it because there's also a lot of technical things that need to be covered. And a lot of the stuff that I've actually rambled about in this is stuff that I wrote down and then cut from the video, because it's like, I do not need to cover this. Like, no one, the formal video does not need to include details on whether, like, the Ari Amira can shoot at a 28 pull down time base. Like, doesn't matter. But I now have that detail, like, in a document on my computer. And yeah, so it's been very slow going. I tried to stop briefly. So last week, let's go back in time to last week. Last week I was supposed to quickly do a short, like, 10-minute video on Tuca and Birdie and one of the scenes that I particularly love that I wrote about. I wrote a Twitter thread about it months ago, and it's still been kind of like sticking with me. And so I was like, hey, you know what? If I'm still thinking about it a couple months later, then it's probably something I can bang out, 2,000 words on super fast, record it, get it out by the end of the week. And then all of the COPPA stuff happened, and like midweek, I decided, like, actually, you know what? No, I am going to do a video on COPPA. And then that took a couple days to do because it took a bunch of revisions to make sure, like, because that was dealing with, like, legal details and whatnot. I was, like, very, very, very delicate with it, and got a bunch of eyes to take a look at it and to be like, hey, am I wrong about anything? Or is there anything that I could be wrong about that I'm presenting as fact and not as, like, opinion? And it was a very fine line to sort of walk with that. And I managed to get that out in time, but then I didn't get the Tuca and Birdie thing out, and then this week has just been an absolute slog of, like, I can't focus. I have been utterly unable to focus all week. I sit down and I try to write, and nothing comes out. It's not even writer's block. I can't look at the document. I can't think in words when I'm sitting in front of the computer. When I'm by myself, when I'm just, like, rambling to someone, when I'm talking about it, if I'm just, like, tapping with my thumbs in Discord, I can get the ideas out in, like, a rough shape, but then when I sit down to try to turn them into nice, coherent, well-structured, properly flowing script format, it's just it doesn't happen. And it's been a very frustrating week to try and make anything come out. And so I'm making this because it's the end of the month, and I know I had the COPPA video out, but the COPPA video feels like a COPPA out in this regard. And I wanted to have something that was a little bit more substantial. And so I'm going to upload this as a exclusive. Like, I'm not going to make this public. It's not a preview. It's I mean, I guess in a sense it is a preview at kind of things to come, but there's a bunch in this that isn't gonna appear elsewhere. And yeah, I mean, and I have this. The funny thing is my habit whenever I get into these, like, phases, and this happens a lot, pretty regular, is whenever I get into these phases, what I find that I end up doing is I'll just, like, do endless camera tests. Like, I mean, I guess that's where the HFR video started in the first place. Was I was just like, I'm just gonna do a bunch of camera tests. I'm just gonna try a bunch of things with, like, frame rates and stuff like that, and see how they all cut together, and just, like, play with it and do all of these different tests with shutter angles and whatnot, and it was playing around with that stuff where it's like, I should actually just turn this into a video, take everything that I learned, whatever. And I end up doing endless camera tests. So I'll come and I'll set things up, and then I'll just, like, I'll get the lights, and I'll get the slate out, and I'll write down all the information of what something's at, and I'll run, I'll swing a pendulum in front of the camera at a bunch of different settings. I'll compare the noise in the shadow details on the wall at a whole bunch of different camera settings, And that's kind of how I feel, how I try to make myself feel productive when I can't do anything. And and maybe this is better than that. So anyway, yeah, I'm gonna try really, really hard to have something proper. Like I really want to. I I like doing this. I like writing. I like editing. I like making videos. I like talking about movies and TV shows and video games. I enjoy doing it, and it fulfills me. And I really want to have something substantial out for hopefully next week or soon, very soon. I want to have a bunch of stuff out in December because it's a great time to get stuff out. And so I'm hoping that there will be more than just this. And yeah. So now I'm going to do my tail slate for syncing purposes because I've been talking for quite a while. And then I can go put this in the computer and start editing it.